Hi there, welcome to this midweek market analysis. So as usual, we'll be going through some of these updates over here and to share with you what are some of the opportunities that you may want to keep an eye on. Now, first thing, of course, if you're aware, we do have the FOMC, ECB, and then of course BOJ coming in for the later part of this week. So do anticipate and kind of expect some volatility coming in, especially of those important data. And if you have any particular trade related to the dollar, the euro, as well as the yen, just make sure that you're factoring in this news events coming in. Right? So with that said, let's take a look at the dollar index first. Now overall, the dollar has been pushing a little bit higher throughout late last week and earlier part of this week here. We are looking at a potential short-term bullishness. If we can kind of get a corrective pullback towards maybe about 15,618 fits, then we can expect a pushback to the upside, right? So a simple 1-2 trade. But of course, with FOMC coming in, a lot of all these technicals may be shifting post FOMC, right? Because fundamental news itself can have like huge disregard to what the pattern is doing, and sometimes we might just spike up to the top or even just spike it down very fast. So of course, we would always suggest that with such a high impact news, if you don't kind of get a breakout technique or you don't get a breakout setup, then you may want to just be patient on that. Now for aggressive trader, this little pattern here on the lower time frame is actually a crawl, and if you put in a divergence, put in RSI, you would likely see a divergence as well. So for those of you who are looking at maybe short-term potential trade off the FOMC, we do have a potential setup that you can look at in terms of a sell breakout. Okay, in other words, closer to its FOMC, if you can get a break to the downside, okay, that can be a potential valid trade. Trading the short-term pullback towards like 100.6 to 100.35. Okay. But then you shift over to the euro. Okay. Overall, we are bigger time frame perspective bearish, but of course we won't wait for a three-wave pullback, right? Again, depending on how the news is going to impact prices, you need to be a little bit patient on that. Now for euro, we don't really have a clear kind of like a divergence setup to look for the counter trend. So if you are focusing on euro, then my suggestion is to wait for the corrective pullback before you get involved in the trade. Right, so not too much on this. Within the week, perhaps, right? Especially after FOMC, we have the ECB affecting the euro as well. So suggestion is to just be a little bit patient and wait out. Then we have the pound. Now between the euro and the pound, I think the pound here is a little bit clearer. Simply we are looking at an impulse and then of course a three-wave corrective pullback. We did get our minor first one. Okay, so of course, ideally if FOMC release, we don't really get a move, price just probably consolidate around this range. Then maybe on Thursday and Friday, if we can get a pushback up, then we have a very nice decent sell trade after a three-wave completed. Okay, so it's not an FOMC trade, but we definitely want to keep an eye on this, look at how it's going to develop. We may get a setup to sell it perhaps end of the week or even maybe early next week, right? This is on the pound dollar. Aussie dollar over here, I'm maintaining a neutral perspective. We kind of currently see price trading within this huge range. Now there is a potential short-term play here for the downside. But of course, depending on your style, depending on how conservative or how aggressive you are, this may develop into a simple three-wave and then another pushback up. You may still capitalize on that short-term downside. But for me personally, I would prefer to focus a little bit on other setups instead of like the Aussie dollar. But of course, if you're interested in Aussie itself, we may have something here very similar to the GBP USD trade. Then we have the dollar Canadian. So dollar Canadian here, of course, FOMC is in play as well because of dollar. What I'm looking here is we may get a pushback up, and ideally we want to see price cuts stall or being rejected around the area, because if we can, then we have a very simple 1, 2, 3. Okay, then this becomes an impulse trade with correction downside, right? Then that becomes a sell trade. Short term though, going to FOMC, of course, you can look for some breakout entry. Short term play to trade off the FOMC over here to the upside, right? Again, I wouldn't be personally interested in that. Okay, to me, it's a little bit too short. But of course, you know, if you are interested to capitalize on some kind of like a short term news trade perspective, this is a valid one, right? Quite similar to the dollar index. Okay, but of course, if you can't trade off the dollar index, then you can look at dollar CAD as a potential short-term news trade. Okay. Now, next up over here, we have the dollar yen. Okay, so dollar yen right now is currently still testing around at 50 and 618 fips. Now, my personal suggestion here is, while I'm interested in the long-term, bigger picture bearishness on the dollar yen, right now, because of this recent pretty impulsive move to the upside, my take here is let's wait for an impulsive drop, a corrective pullback before we commit to any sell trade, right? If you don't kind of get that, in terms of the yen pairs here, I think there are better opportunities on the pound yen as well as Aussie yen. Okay, so dollar yen, while we're long term looking at bearish potential, right now we just want to be a little bit patient, wait off maybe after the FOMC or even the BOJ on Friday. Going into next week, we may get a better setup. On gold, okay, gold over here, my view is we have completed a 5-wave move to the upside. Okay, we did get our first push down. So if we can get a little bit of a corrective move like that, we may complete a simple 1, 2, 3 corrective pullback, and of course somewhere around 1945, which is where the previous wave 4 is, we may start to get a little bit of the bounce and we can start to look for buy trade opportunity. Now short term, okay, we may be looking at this here, but of course if you are understanding in terms of like the combination of technical plus FOMC, of course, the news always take precedence, which means that the news would disregard whatever technicals or pattern, right? It doesn't really care. And you know, when we are doing our analysis on a technical perspective, we'll also look at it independently, which means, of course, you know, as a trader, you want to look at both and then make a decision which one you're going to give more weightage, which one you're going to make a decision based on. It can be a combination of both. You can say that, okay, I'm only focused on technical, or you can say that, oh, we have FOMC, let's, you know, not take any trade related to the dollar. Every trader is different, right, in terms of the style and the approach that they're going to have. So for me personally, I would avoid, okay, taking trades like that going into FOMC, right, because I tend to combine both, right. But having said all this, of course, you can still keep an eye on how price is going to react around that 15,618. If you can get a little bit of a rejection, you know, you can still look for a downside short term towards 1945, right? Crude oil over here, we do have a potential breakout trade. Right? We have a massive rally of a 5-wave up. So right now, we are looking at potentially a pullback. Okay, and what you can look out for is this little low here around $78.35. If you can get a break of that, right, ideally impulsively, then that will be a sell trade setup, a sell stop, okay, and then we'll be looking at target back towards like $73.80, right? So I think the potential trade in terms of if you also want to leverage on like the volatility coming in from dollar based on FOMC, crude oil over here may be a better one. Okay, of course, dollar CAD here is a potential one as well. I think this two here as a short-term FOMC news trade, you know, you may want to pay a little bit more attention to them. Then we have S&P, right? So S&P over here, I'm maintaining a very neutral perspective, still very patient to it. You know, eventually price is still not really going anywhere, right? It's still basically stuck within that range. What I'm expecting is if you get a push down, impulsively breaking this low, then that opens up a bigger corrective pullback before the bounce. So I'm just being neutral right now and patient and just give time to the market and see how it's going to develop first. Okay. Now pound yen and Aussie yen, they're pretty much a similar setup where we're looking at downside, right? So you can see here, very similar setup over here. So both of this, I'm looking at a breakout, right? So if you can't get price to break below a significant low right now in terms of Aussie yen, here's around 94.85. If you can get a break, you know, we're looking for a sell target at 92.20. Invalidation is 95.85. And then for GBP JPY, I'm looking for the break below 180.7 with a target around 178 and an invalidation around 182.55. Okay, so this two here, we're looking at that. Pound Aussie, we may have an opportunity here. Okay, we don't really have any significant news that has a direct relation to the pound as well as the Aussie. So this pair here may be something worth noting because, you know, we don't really have much of a fundamental impact within this week. So if we can get a corrective continuation push up, you know, towards this area and we kind of start to see some kind of rejection, then we'll definitely would have a sell trade with a 1 2 3 setup. This can be a first wave down. This 3-wave pullback is the second wave, and we can then anticipate the third wave down, right? So this is also an opportunity that I'm paying close attention to. Okay, we may get this within the week, or we may get it maybe next week, but in any case, I think it's worth paying attention to this pair. So that's all for me for this week midweek update over here. All the best to trading, and I'll see you guys in the next one.